Hey, everybody, I'm Stephen Foskett, publisher of Gestalt IT and organizer of Tech Field Day. And we are here at Tech Field Day in Santa Clara, where we have been discussing the evolution of computing. We talked about CXL and the emerging composable infrastructure. We talked about the cloud. We talked about the data center and the changing emphasis between cloud and data center and edge. And that's one of the things that came up again and again and again here at Tech Field Day is the world of edge computing. Now, we actually did a roundtable discussion about this previously, and frankly, it's questionable exactly what the edge is. Is it anything that's not in the data center? Does the cloud count? Does a mobile device count? I don't want to necessarily have that argument, but what I do want to talk about is the fact that more and more devices are being moved out of the confines of the data center and into other locations, whether it is retail or industrial IoT or increasingly mobile ships, military, all sorts of things. Heck, even the moon, as we talked about, in Mars. I mean, the CubeSats around Mars. I guess that's edge computing too. So the question is, first off, for the delegates, how real is this, or is this just another marketing trend? Are things really being moved to the edge? Who wants to start with that?
Well, if I can start very quickly, I mean, we always had edge. So remote offices, so everything that was outside the data center was edge. Maybe we didn't have edge as a word years ago. I mean, most of my customers at that time, when I was, really building infrastructure, so when I had this real job, and they had, remote offices all over the world connected with MPLSs or, other stuff. But
yeah, you make a good point. We used to call it robo, right?
Yeah.
But essentially what's happening now is there's just more capabilities that we can bring to these remote locations that, instead of calling them robo, we're calling them edge, but all of a sudden there's more devices, more capabilities, more bandwidth, whatever, right? And so capabilities have enhanced, and so there's a lot of things that used to be centralized that can be decentralized in a good way that will help out the business that just weren't previously possible. And
yeah.
So, yeah, we always had edge, but it's just getting better, and so we need a better name for it, I guess. I don't know.
Well, what happened to the DMZ?
You still have it, but it can be kind of anywhere, right? But that's a different problem, I think. I just looked up Windows domain controllers, and when the read-only domain controllers, which was really designed as like a remote office solution. It was introduced in Windows 2008, and now Microsoft basically says don't use them, but that's a different story. Yeah, I think it's just kind of always been there. It's just evolved into what we're doing and what we see.
Well, and it keeps, expanding. So a few years ago, the remote workers were less, and now, especially after the pandemic, everybody could be a remote worker. So many enterprises adopted technology, SaaS software, in many circumstances that, and it was not the case, before the pandemic, for example. And so now you are this continuous expansion towards the far edge, and it's changing everything, even in, security for some companies. Some were already there, but actually for others, this paradigm change also changed the way they have to think security.
So do we dive down that rabbit hole now of what is edge? Like, does the distributed workforce count as an edge, or is it more along the lines of a location with a closet where a bunch of gear goes?
Yeah, Melissa wanted to jump in and stir the pot a little bit, because I remember before the cloud was a thing, right? It was like someone read it in CIO magazine. At the time, I worked in a very, very large data center. It was the company I worked for was one of the top 5 biggest consumers of VMware in the world, right? So I started in cloud, and we're all looking at each other like, we've been doing this stuff for like a long time, right? So we had the cloud trend, and I kind of feel like the cloud is commonplace now, right? There's no more cloud trend. It's everywhere. There's no more like, this is the buzzword, this is the hot new thing. Someone says cloud, at this point, your eyes kind of glaze over. And Stephen, I wanted to jump back to something we talked about on the round table, right? the whole 2020 thing kind of pushed some changes in the computing world in general. So this is like the next evolution of stuff, right? Everybody went to the cloud. We're good with the cloud. Well, what's the next big thing we're going to talk about, right? As people didn't get into their data center, so maybe they started doing stuff other places. And Robo's been around forever. I used to do a bunch of Robo stuff too, with like manufacturing and things like that. So I kind of feel like this is like the next hot trend, which kind of ties into, well, how do you define it? This goes back to the early days of the cloud, where we're just like, well, how do you define the cloud anyway? Like, what is it? How do you put a name on it? It's like the same thing over again, because we need that next big thing, I guess, as a technological society to gravitate towards.
So it sounds like you're skeptical.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, well let's go in that direction. Skepticism.
Well, actually, I mean, if you look at even the vendors, okay, so a few years ago, they didn't have real edge servers. I mean, think about the retail shop, okay? So I mean, at least I saw a lot of times PCs used as servers.
Yeah.
And, cabling that didn't really make any sense. So other stuff that you can't really think of if you have an enterprise solution, even if it's a retail shop. And the other day I saw a major vendor proposing a server designed for the edge, which is smaller, which is with different fans to not to avoid too much noise, a form factor that can stay. Actually, in the advertisement, they showed it in a broom closet, because this is where this stuff is. Okay, so it's more rugged. Put it this way, and so they are finally understanding that users are asking for it. I mean, asking for this kind of devices, and they were let's say niche vendors that were building this stuff. Now even the primary vendors are finally understanding and building stuff that makes sense for this kind of applications. So it's not really a trend or it's not just a fashion. It's something, and users are asking for it. Now the management part could be a totally different story, because on one end, now finally we have the hardware. Software comes always later. What we call usually fleet management. Okay, so how do you manage devices that are deployed in the middle of nowhere? How you install patches, install everything, and the first day zero install of this stuff, because you have the clerk, you have somebody that doesn't know anything about computers in this retail shop, and they have to plug it in, attach the network, boot the machine for the first time. So all the management is, well, there are solutions, but they are not as common as we may think.
They're not common. So it's like the baling wire and duct tape that used to hold together our data center infrastructure forever is now just moving out to all these different locations, and we're getting by as best we can until the space matures, right? Like you said, they're solutions, but they're not really complete or comprehensive yet.
Will the space ever mature in terms of like management and location? You're not going to build a data center in your remote site, and you're always going to have to put, no matter what the form factor of the computer is, you're always going to have to put it somewhere. And it's going to get dusty, and fans will clog up and things like that.
Do you think?
Yeah, that's where they start to look, I think, from a management perspective, a lot more like a corporate laptop is where they're much more disposable than the hardware that you've got in the data center. Something goes wrong with it, we'll just re-image it completely. That doesn't work. We'll just ship you another one and slot it in. You're not going to be dispatching someone with a lot of technical skill to go and resolve this.
Yeah. Well, you do a lot of work with like Wi-Fi and like places where access points don't get touched by Wi-Fi engineers after they're dropped off. Mostly, how does that kind of support work? Because that's a pretty good example of edge in a different context.
That's a really good point, because I mean, basically, all those APs are edge computing.
Yeah, but at their core, they're designed from the start to be centrally managed. So they're for the most part phoning home to a controller or a cloud solution, and you're monitoring them that way. If they've got mechanisms within the software that, hey, this radio is stuck, we're going to bring that down and come back up, and that's just part of it at its core. I mean, there's also the mechanism within design that we're doing some level of overlapping coverage, where if you lose one, maybe it's not ideal. There's still secondary coverage for you to connect to, and it'll still work in that area. And so there's a lot that solution has going for it, but it was designed from the start to be distributed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, Enrico.
No problem.
One of the things that I love about the Tech Field Day events is we can get people from different disciplines together and we can learn from each other. And I remember when SD-WAN was coming and the Wi-Fi people were like, hey, we've already been talking about, separating management plane or control plane from data plane. We've already been talking about remote device management and all this stuff for years and years. And here you are as well saying the same thing again, because out of necessity, you've had to do exactly what you just said. You've had to figure out out-of-box experience. You've had to figure out how to have inexperienced installers, difficult locations. I mean, you think that it's hard to have a rack of servers in a warehouse. How about all the different places access points have to go underneath the seats at a stadium outdoors or something? So I think that we can learn so much from the world of Wi-Fi when we're trying to think about edge computing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that when we talk about these servers that are out at the edge, I think a very common workflow that I have is that if there's an AP that isn't really doing what it needs to do, it's a factory reset. It comes up, auto discovery happens, it phones home, and this entire configuration is pushed back to it. That auto discovery, that ZTP, the further away you're going to get from the data center and your core team of people that are deploying it, the more important that's going to end up being.
Don't you think that, well, to the point of, having these management planes and separated by the data planes and everything, so the future of the edge is hyperconvergence anyway. So from the perspective of management simplicity, having, everything that looks similar somehow in the way you manage it. So this is probably, the most interesting evolution for HCI. I mean, so the fleet management part, everything. And at the moment, very few vendors are taking, the necessary step to build the software to manage at scale these kind of environments.
Yeah, and for that, I actually want to call out one company in particular that's talking about this, which is Scale Computing.
Yes.
They are 100% working on basically HCI for Edge, and it's a natural fit. I think that they didn't even maybe know that it was a fit until people started buying it and using it that way, because you don't want to be in the situation that so many edge computing or remote offices or warehouses or whatever were in previously, where you had all this different equipment, all these cables, all this specialized stuff that no one could touch that was, buried under something in the warehouse.
Right, yeah. If you can just plug in power and Ethernet, you're done. And it's also disposable to the point where it's easy to replace, meaning, to your point, everything's centrally managed. I just swap and replace if something fails. Much easier to maintain than the more complex solution with all these different moving parts that, are managed separately.
But the hardware needs to be simple as well, because
Right.
it's not like a data center where you're going to have this rack of storage, rack of compute. If it's going to be at a remote office or something, you want that all together in one box where it is literally just power and one Ethernet that goes in. So,
And I think that's the point he's making, is that's the fit for hyperconvergence,
Yeah.
right? You've got a plug for Ethernet for the for the actual communication. Maybe you have another one for out of band. You have power, and you maybe have 2 or 3 of these in a shelf or on a rack, and they're swappable. Basically, they just cluster together and they handle all of that.
Yeah, and consider that most of the time we are talking about in this edge location, you have 2, 4, 5 virtual machines, not more than that.
Right.
And so that these are really, really small clusters, which is, introduces a lot of other issues, including that the hypervisors itself uses too much resources for this. So you need an optimization level that is really, really important. So both hardware and software has to be designed in a different way.
Well, I think it's all the old challenges are still present, and for a robo institution, I mean, do you want to go deploy 3-tier complex architecture at every site? for your edge, your new edge, it's going to be a nightmare otherwise. I think there needs to be innovation for solid, persistent, performant storage. Those type of things have to be part of the solution.
I mean, I think they mostly are in modern edge devices, right? Like you have most of the modern edge devices all show up with SSDs. Shoot, modern laptops almost all ship with SSDs. I think it's pretty hard to find a spinning disk.
Yeah, but is that may be durable, but does it replicate? Does it have
Yeah.
other features that you would expect for modern data center storage? But on the other hand, is it necessary?
Yeah, so if you're just rolling out a couple at that location, there's not a high demand on it, and it's just sort of servicing the need for low latency at a specific location or in a specific region, and you've got an application that supports going back to your centralized data center as a backup. If that storage fails, is that okay? And that's going to be use case and application driven.
I think we were talking about this the other day. Hopefully the idea is that maybe there's a lot of data being created at the edge and maybe it's being processed to a degree, but then it's, offloaded somewhere else. And if you lose capabilities there, then you just start anew, you put in the new hardware, you boot it up, you configure it, and everything's pulled down and nothing is lost. And I think that would be the hope. That's feasible for most edge locations these days, I feel like, as network connectivity has proliferated through all kinds of new stuff, whether it's SD-WAN or 5G or whatever. And the need to basically have some kind of resilient data store at the edge is not as important as it was in the past when we were pretty much a 3-tier everywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, what if your use cases you want a domain controller that's not an Azure domain controller on your edge device?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about the edge as also the next frontier for some technologies? I mean, think about decentralized storage, peer-to-peer storage that failed so many times because the why it is designed. But actually, if you have 1,000 shops and you have the connectivity that is now available practically everywhere, why not build a huge object store out of these 1,000 nodes?
Yeah.
I mean, they are all under your control. So you have a certain level of security. You have resources there to run 2-4 virtual machines. And maybe you have a couple of hard drives or better SSDs doing nothing for 99% of the time. So you can save huge amounts of money. And it is disaster recovery. It's all included.
Yeah,
for free.
Form factor aside, you focusing on the functionality like that, I mean, it could be a win. So Edge has a lot of it's undiscovered, a lot of potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's exciting, whether it's cloud or whether it's, SD-WAN or Wi-Fi or whatever topic, to see how these technologies can be brought to bear. I love that, Enrico, because you're so right that so many of these distributed and peer-to-peer approaches have been attempted in places that they really kind of didn't belong. But suddenly, maybe it's a natural fit. And I think that's why it's so great to have all these different perspectives here, because I think that people from different industries are going to be able to say, wait, what about this? The out of box experience, the fact that you just opened up a brand new piece of hardware and you don't know what to do with it, and it kind of phones home and configures itself. This whole taxonomy of management versus operational control versus production. Hyperconvergence, all these things are, make a lot of sense in this environment. What other technologies can you think of? I mean, one of the things that just jumps to my mind is that some of the data center products that have been developed to control temperature and so on, those could be deployed very much at the edge too. I've seen some interesting sealed racks with their own cooling systems that, maybe in a data center, okay, I can see why that's important, but in the edge, I can see why that's extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, some of the devices you see are more tolerant to a range of temperatures and in atmospheric conditions, but at the same time, if you're going to have a rack of devices, you're probably going to want that temperature control to be localized, because that means you don't have to build a special room and count on somebody to run it and all of those things.
Any other technologies you can think of? I mean, connectivity technologies. I know that there's a lot of companies that we've seen at Tech Field Day. I mean, Zero Tier, for example, punching through firewalls.
Yeah, I don't want to say the other word, but Docker containers are pretty useful, I think, in terms of being able to run, get higher levels of density in a sense of virtualization to run a lot of workloads, so especially workloads that can support it. That can be a good approach to get more out of the hardware that's there.
Well, and you know, after this roundtable, we are going to SETI, right? So think about all the. I mean, there are some very corner use cases, but you have thousands of CPUs at this point. You have a supercomputer. Do you have any workload that can run maybe during the night? I mean, when you are not using your virtual machines for your store.
I don't want to mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, you can,
But maybe we can search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
yeah,
Yes,
I mean, no,
yes.
but maybe you have some AI workload, so you need just to do image recognition on thousand or million of, I don't know, photos, something like that. And you can use this. I mean, you can distribute some of these images to these remote locations, and then during the night you don't have anything to do. So,
Right, I
or
mean-
maybe you can use it to. I don't know. I mean, so you can have a very huge distributed database of some sort.
So that's
You do.
twice you've mentioned the idea of a matrix of edge computing devices together.
Yeah, you have the network, you have the resources, they are distributed. I mean, it's a secondary.
We're going to see a great example of that this afternoon. For a long time with the floating at home, like it's using distributed hardware to run the numbers and then phone back.
That's a common data pattern in Lambda architecture, where you do some analysis and alerting locally, and then everything gets ultimately uploaded to some larger centralized system that does batch processing.
I think it's
deeper analysis.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in about industrial IoT is definitely trending in that direction, where there's sort of this tiered approach where you do data collection on site, then you have machine learning that's processing that data on site in edge computing resources, and then you pass up the stack the most interesting or relevant metrics to the next level. And I think that's absolutely something that we're going to see in edge computing. So that means that this environment is not going to necessarily be hyper-converged standard systems, because it's going to need processing. It's going to need ML processing power and so on. It may be a bigger system than we think that is existing in these edge sites. I mean, let's talk, retail. If you're going to have a whole bunch of cameras and sensors and so on, you're going to need some pretty strong computation capabilities to deal with all that data on site before you pass it up the stack or before you pass it to distributed. And so I could see that these systems may not be as simple as we think they may be. Or am I wrong?
Nothing ever is. So once we start deploying this stuff more in the field, then we're going to realize all the things we forgot about, most likely, as happens time after time.
The oversight's kicking. They always do.
Well, and again, so they are powerful. But so if you think that a phone today as specialized tensor CPUs or whatever they are called, so they have accelerators for. So why not in your small edge server? And yes, you do video analysis to analyze the customers' behaviors, so that you can position better your products in your retail shop. Why not? I mean, so and you just pass to the cloud or to the core just the relevant information, so you can collect and see if there are patterns that are similar in other locations. I mean, we can think about everything. And so you have again a lot of resources distributed. You can use them locally and then distribute things, and then send to the core. Or actually, you can have something at the core, distribute to the remote location, do something, and then return the result. I mean, potentially, it's huge.
Yeah.
I think one of the sort of more approachable near-term applications of this is that you've got options for resiliency of existing workloads and existing applications. Is that you've got manufacturing facilities that they've got some centralized like job data that can get pushed down to the equipment. All right, maybe you can centralize all of that and just have a local option. Here is today's job data that's going to be on site. We lose access to that centralized. You're still going for the day before it becomes a problem. So I think from an application perspective, you can, there's a lot of options for existing things that you're doing now that you're just moving some of that compute and some of that storage to on-site for near term.
Maybe in the future, the edge definition will be changed because every discipline has its own definition regarding to the edge. For example, you said that IoT devices, yes, there are lots of IoT devices in the world, and they're getting they're producing lots of data in every hour, in every second. It's a huge data, big data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, as Enrico mentions, more and more processors are going to have tensor cores in them, and that's going to drive this. Because I think that's the interesting thing is that when you deploy solutions to solve one problem, you often create your next problem. And so if we deploy more and more tensor cores at the edge, then we're more likely to collect more data, which means that we haven't actually solved the problem. We've just added more data to process, and then we have to process that. And I think that this is really why, well, I guess this is my question, my final question for you. In my mind, the proliferation of networking technologies like 5G, hyperconvergence, distributed storage, tensor cores, and industrial IoT, and all of this means that edge is maybe a little different than the old use case of remote office, because where once it was sort of something you had to grudgingly do because of poor communication connections, or now it's more of an opportunity and less of a penalty. Am I wrong? Am I right?
I think you're right. So I say all the time that basically IT moves in waves of centralization and decentralization. This is the latest wave of decentralization. There's a lot of new stuff we're getting excited about, maybe a little over enthusiastic about, and we'll probably learn some lessons over the next few years about what is appropriate to put in the edge and what's not. But by and large, we're going to be seeing far more capabilities going to the edge than we did previously, and we'll stay there. And there might be a few things that we pull back in when we realize that wasn't really a good fit for the edge, but most of the stuff we stick out there will be there to stay.
Yeah, I think it's just more a broader societal thing of measuring more things precisely, right? So we're capturing more data from various devices and various things to be more accurate in our processes of all sorts, whether they be industrial or even cooking. I think that's something that's leads to this.
Yeah, I think that's really great insight. And I think you're completely right, Ken, that there is a constant shift between these things. But what happens is once it gets its hooks in, it's going to be there. And I think that's what I'm seeing, is that this is not going to go away. It's going to evolve. It's going to be refined, but it's only going to get more and more.
Well, it makes sense. There's a proliferation of data center technologies. Why not apply it at the edge and make that more robust, more performance, more productive?
Well, I think that this is the conversation that we're going to be having now, starting now. So this is the new frontier, or a new frontier for tech. This is certainly something that we're going to be talking about. And we at Tech Field Day are probably going to be doing an Edge Field Day in Q1 of 2023. So if you've listened to this and you've said, this is interesting, this is new, this is real, this is relevant, stay tuned at Tech Field Day. Maybe subscribe to our newsletter so you get an announcement when that happens. Maybe submit yourself as a presenter or a delegate if this is your topic, because I think, have to have this conversation, because so many of the technologies that we've been working with are going to the edge. So many of the drivers of new technology development are coming from the edge. And I think that that's inevitable. And I think, as all of you are pointing out, we can't get carried away with the hype, but we have to reflect on the reality of what this new use case needs and how technology can serve that. And that's pretty much what we do here at Tech Field Day. So please keep an eye out for Edge Field Day, and please do continue this conversation. If you go to techfieldday.com, you'll see the names of the delegates around this table, maybe in the notes for this video as well. And you can continue the conversation with them and with us here at Gestalt IT.